Hello and welcome to Help Your Garden Hibernate for Winter. I just realized once I shared my screen, since I only have a single screen, I can't see how many people are coming in. That's okay. Give it just a couple minutes until we hit 6:30 before getting started. Okay, pardon those technical difficulties. Again, we're here tonight for Help Your Garden Hibernate for Winter with our instructor, Suzanne Bontempo. It's sponsored by Bosca and the City of Santa Clara. For tonight's presentation, all attendees are muted. We are encouraging questions, but please know we will address all the questions at the end. So if you're worried you're going to forget your question, please go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll just go down the list at the end of the presentation. And this webinar is being recorded. It usually takes Bosca a couple of weeks before they get it up on the website, but you'll be able to review it once it is available. And for those of you who don't know, the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency represents 26 agencies in the San Francisco Bay Area, serving 40,000 businesses and community organizations in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. That's almost 2 million people who benefit from Bosca's partnerships with both SFPUC and Valley Water and other local agencies to help everybody regulate the water sources that we all deserve in our local area. The program objectives for the landscape class series is to help people understand how they can best conserve in their own gardens, because outdoor water use in the Bay Area is the one place that we can really make more efforts to conserve. Outdoor water use takes about half of residential water use. And by learning water efficient plants and gardening techniques, we can really help bring the use of outdoor water down. So if you're in Bosca's service area, you're probably familiar with their Lawn Be Gone program, where you can get rebates for changing out your front or back garden turf to water-wise plants. They also offer $200 rebates for rain barrels, and now's a perfect time to jump on that, since hopefully we're approaching another good rainy season. Also, smart controllers, those that regulate watering that fluctuates with the weather conditions, takes your mind out of that equation, so you can just set it and forget it almost. You can get some really nice rebates from Bosca for those as well. And for rain gardens, rain garden projects that meet minimum requirements, get rebates for up to $300. The City of Santa Clara wants to remind you that we also give a very generous rebate for the landscape conversion rebate program through Valley Water. And now is our best planting time. So if you're a City of Santa Clara resident, you can get up to $5,000, and commercial properties can get up to $110,000. So please look into that if you're living in Santa Clara and you still have a loan. Valley Water sponsors very similar rebates. The program I just mentioned, lawn conversion, the rates differ throughout different municipalities, but it's very similar to Bosca's. So check out Valley Water's website to see what cost sharing might be available in your city. And if you're looking into projects like that, South Bay Green Gardens is a great resource. They have lots of design layouts, plant templates, how-to videos, and just ways to help get you started if you're looking into starting that kind of project. If you're not too familiar with plants, bayareagardening.org offers a great photo opportunity. You can go through the website and see gardens that you like, hover over pictures of plants that interest you, and you'll get some information about those plants. So you don't have to be a plant specialist to be able to pick out things that you think you'd like to put in your own garden. It's really helpful. And for more classes that are coming up through the end of this fall season, they're on your screen right now, but where you registered for this class, you can also see the other offerings that are available and sign up online. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to our instructor, Susan Bontempo.
Thank you. I want to make sure. And you're seeing the right screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Really excited and delighted to talk to you about helping your garden hibernate for the winter. I've been working as a professional gardener now for about 30 years, and I've come to understand how important the tasks that we take the time to do now in the garden in preparation for the fall and winter months can really have a hugely positive influence on our spring and summer garden next year. Just really helps encourage and bolster the health of the garden in the coming months. And we'll see a reduction of pests, which is always a bonus. So let's get started. So I'm going to go through slides for about an hour, and then I'm going to review some of these topics and talk about instructions for garden maintenance, pruning plants, protecting our soil and nurturing it through the winter months, fall and winter pest prevention, why fall is the best month for planting, watering the garden during the fall and winter months, and additional time for your questions at the end. So, garden maintenance and cleaning up. This may be the most important task as it directly influences the overall health of the garden. So let's dig in. So maintenance around the garden looks like maybe monitoring for pests. This might not sound like it's much of a maintenance, but it is very important for us to take notes throughout the year to see what type of pests that we experienced. Was there an excessive aphid situation on the apple tree or on the roses this past spring or summer? Or was there another pest that we happened to notice over the past 6 months or so that was a little bit notable, something that was a little bit more or different from the norm? And are there actions that we can take to prevent or reduce the pests for the next spring or summer? What those actions could look like would be maybe rotating food crops, maybe foregoing or changing out the overhead watering to eliminate fungal leaf diseases, maybe watering the garden earlier in the morning around the sunrise hours as opposed to the middle of the night to reduce slug activity or earwig activity. Keep in mind that slugs and snails are going to definitely be, as well as earwigs, definitely going to be more active during a cool, wet season. But when we're watering in the middle of the night, we seem to see higher populations of those pests, as opposed to watering closer to the sunrise hours. We can also look at preventing pests by picking up and harvesting any food that we haven't harvested or picked up yet, such as picking up any apples that are on the ground, maybe cleaning up any of those food crops from the summer, such as the tomatoes, maybe the zucchini squash that are sitting out there still kind of like maybe slightly rotting, but we just haven't gotten out there yet. This is the best time to get out there and clean up any food that might be overwintering. And the reason why is because it attracts pests such as fruit flies, ants, rats and mice, raccoons, and other critters. Really, we'd want to avoid having those other critters in our garden. So we want to remove their food source, remove the things they're interested in nibbling on. And then if we do have any plants that have diseased leaves, we want to place them, we want to remove those and place them into the municipal green waste bin. we want to avoid putting those in our home compost system. So that's something to look at. If we have any dead or damaged or broken branches or limbs like on trees or shrubs, it's a good time just to kind of prune those or clean those up, cut them off so that we can prevent any additional damage if we happen to have a wind event or excessive weather that might further rip or damage that limb. So that's what we want to do in regards to maintenance. But then if we haven't already, as I just mentioned, cleaning up those food crops, such as the annual food crops, if we haven't cut them back yet, such as those tomatoes, the zucchini, the cucumbers, eggplants, peppers, anything else that we were growing that kind of looks done or has started to die back, this is the time we want to cut it back to the ground. So these are photos of my tomato bed. On the left is the tomato plant, and there's still tomatoes on it. Some of them are kind of rotten, but there's definitely dieback happening. That plant is definitely looking like it's done with these yellow leaves and such, and some brown. So I just I'm cutting the plant stem at the base of the plant, just cutting it. I'm not ripping it out of the soil. I'm just cutting it at the base. And then I'm going to amend this bed with some soil amendment, some compost, and add some fertilizer, some organic fertilizer. And then I'm going to plant something that's going to be a cool season crop like garlic or maybe onions, maybe carrots or beets. Or I will plant some leafy greens such as kale, chard, or lettuce. So the idea here is we're rotating the crop, and those would be the food crops that would be ideal to go into a bed that you had some summer fruiting vegetables. So the edible parts were above the ground in the form of the plants I just mentioned, the tomato, the zucchini, the eggplant, and so forth. We want to plant something that's the opposite of that. So root vegetable or leafy green. Or if we're not going to plant any food, we're going to put in some cover crops. My favorite is fava beans. They are so easy, and we can enjoy the food that they produce, but it's a wonderful way to, continue to have that bed being utilized and nurtured throughout the winter season. This is also a great time of the year to collect seeds. So here I have seeds from my spring and summer flowers. Just a few examples. So from the left, it's Clarkia or Farewell to Spring. They're in the pods, and if I shake the pods out, the little seeds come out. I can save those for a couple more months before I'd want to distribute them around my garden. In the middle, I have Scabiosis seeds, or like the pods that I was able to rub some seeds off of those pods. And then on the right are chard seeds from my chard that bolted this past spring when the weather started to get warm. And I just kind of had it hanging on all summer. And now they're dry. So I just was like stripping those little seeds off, and I went to go plant them in one of my other raised beds. So another great opportunity to save some seeds, to sow in your own garden or to share with friends. But, let's take advantage of some of the plants that we already have to continue with the cycles. Something else that I really love is this wonderful campaign that you'll see some of the pollinator groups sharing. This one in particular is Leave the Leaves. This is when we get to practice the art of being a lazy gardener. Now, sometimes we think of gardening tasks, especially now, we're like, oh, it's cold out there, getting shorter daylight hours, it gets dark early. I don't really want to spend a lot of time out there. Well, guess what? This is one of the easiest tasks because we don't need to rake. We get to leave those leaves. Keep in mind that these fallen leaves from our deciduous trees and shrubs provide food and shelter for overwintering chrysalis and cocoons from butterflies and moths, ground beetles and ladybug beetles, and other beneficial beetles will hibernate and in those leaves and using them as shelter for the winter. Many of our ground nesting bees, keeping in mind that 70% of our native bees are ground nesters. They will burrow in the soil below, and that blanket of leaves is going to be nice insulation for them. Also keep in mind that these leaves are Mother Nature's mulch. So this is free mulch that plant is producing. So as those when those leaves fall on the ground, they start to decompose, and then they're food for the soil microbes that will then further support that plant. Also, when we leave the leaves, we notice that birds will also scratch around looking for food in the form of bugs. So it really helps them through the winter months. So please leave the leaves in areas where you can. Absolutely sweep those leaves away from walkways, pathways, patios, and decks because they can be a little slippery. Also, rake those leaves or remove them from ground covers, remove them from any perennials and succulents or other plants that might get buried. They probably wouldn't like that, but leave the leaves in areas where we can to benefit the soil and the wildlife that is in our garden. Okay, next we're going to talk about pruning. So I love this illustration from spruce.com. It's a nice guide to help that helps outline when to prune what. So flowering trees, shrubs, and vines are trimmed in the late winter, early spring. So let's say around March. So we don't have to worry about those yet, unless of course there's something that would be vulnerable in a weather event. We'd of course want to secure that, but we can forego that until the spring. Deciduous fruit trees, roses, berry plants are pruned once they're dormant. So you can start pruning them as early as the end of November is usually when we see our those fruit trees going into complete dormancy. We're looking at like apples, pears, plums, any of those fruit trees that have lost all their leaves. But I enjoy pruning these plants in January when, it seems like that's a really great month to get back in the garden, one of those warm days. And I enjoy the quiet of the winter and getting out there to do the deciduous fruit tree pruning and pruning my roses that's when I've always done it. But note that cherry trees and apricots, those are going to be pruned in the summer after their fruit has been harvested. Those are summer pruned plants. So if you do have an apricot or a cherry, please don't prune it during the winter months. The moisture sometimes can encourage a certain fungus that those two trees are prone to. Evergreen trees will be pruned early in the spring or not at all. And then perennials are pruned in the fall or spring, depending on the type of perennial or plant that they are. So let's talk about those a little bit. So woody perennials they include all trees and shrubs, no matter what their size or proportion. So sometimes we might think of a perennial as a small plant that flowers, but it can also include trees and shrubs in this category as being woody. Woody perennials can increase in both height and width, which provides them with the strength to support new wood every year. So their woody framework is covered with bark. So some types of plants are considered semi-woody because they aren't quite as woody as a tree or a shrub. Examples could include like climbing hydrangea or wisteria, or shrubby perennial herbs such as rosemary, lavender, thyme, and some salvias you might be familiar with. So it's advised to prune them back about a third to maintain their shape. And this is going to happen after they've flowered, after their blooming cycles when we prune them. It's also going to not only maintain the shape, but encourage a fuller flush of flowers. And also prolong the plant's life. It just is going to grow a healthier plant when we are able to prune these woody perennials back after their pruning cycle. Best time to do this is really right after they've flowered. So again, it kind of depends. Oftentimes I find lavenders I'm pruning in the late spring and again in the very late fall, like around now. So pruning herbaceous perennial plants. So an herbaceous plant is a non-woody perennial that or plant where where we see the plant above ground, but it either completely or partially dies back in the winter. So they have this is a plant that's growing from a root or a tuber or rhizome or a bulb underground, which allows them to survive. So these are non-woody perennials that are, or non-woody plants with characteristics that differentiate them from the trees and the shrubs and the bushes that I was just explaining. So this is a sedum. This is Sedum autumn joy, and some other herbaceous plants that I have in my garden would be the asters. We're going to see maybe oregano. Sometimes oregano will die back just to a flat mat, and then it will start to regrow from that base. Um, Although some oreganos grow more like a shrub. Those are just some examples of things that of the herbaceous perennials that are going to die back. Sometimes we think the plant completely disappeared and we're like, what the heck? And then we see in the spring a little bit of new growth coming up and it's wonderful. Okay, but the previous picture was to show that how the example of the stems, they have died back and we see the new growth coming. But something that I've learned in the recent years is that we want to try to keep those stems tall if we can. As a trained maintenance gardener, this took me several years to change my habits and to be okay with leaving taller stems. And the reason why we want to leave the stems tall at about 18 to 20 inches is because several species of our native bees here throughout California will use those stems. They will use, if you notice, there's a little hollowness in the middle of the stem. The picture on the left is my Shasta daisies that I leave tall now, and I have noticed that these native bees will lay their eggs in the stem stacked with pollen for the larvae as they hatch before emerging as an adult. About 30% of our native bees are stem dwellers and will appreciate the resources you leave for them in your garden. Now, if you really don't think you can be okay with that look, maybe you think it looks a little too scrappy, well, you can cut them at the base and just lay them on the ground in a little bundle next to the plants, and that would be helpful too. We also want to invite birds. They feed on insects in the garden. They reduce pests. Plants, the way we do this is we really want to allow plants to complete their life cycle, letting flowers go to seed. This provides food and nesting material for the birds. Berries of native plants are found to provide important nutrients for birds and others in that garden food chain. These plants are going to be packed with healthy fats and energy for the birds to withstand their winter season. For instance, I grow sunflowers each year specifically for the birds to enjoy ahead of the winter months. So my sunflowers are getting pecked at pretty good right now, but that brings me a lot of joy to see all the songbirds coming and visiting my garden. And plants like clematis or Japanese anemones, if you've ever grown those, you notice that their seed pods are kind of fluffy. They create this kind of fluff. Well, I also leave those because the birds will use that fluff as nesting material, and it's pretty fun. So changing your garden practices might be the easiest way to fight climate change and support your local ecosystem. I just love this from healthyarts.org. It really speaks to our fall and winter gardening tasks. All right. Let's talk about protecting the soil and nurturing it nurturing its health throughout the fall and winter months. So we use compost to nurture the soil's health over the next seasons, months. So throughout the fall into the winter. So compost is organic matter that has been eaten by bacteria and fungus and microbes, worms, and other decomposers. We can either make the compost at home or we can purchase the compost. But the idea here is that we regularly want to be adding compost to the soil to continue to enhance its health. We will be applying about 1 to 2 inches of compost around the root zone or the drip line of the plant. We'll do this around all the plants throughout the garden. We can also mix compost into existing soil at time of planting. So compost, when we add it to our soil, when we're laying it just on top, it's going to work its way in, so we don't have to scratch it in or anything. It's just very easy just to lay it around the drip line of the plant. When we add compost to the soil and when nurturing our soil with compost, it improves that soil structure. So it will enhance clay, making it easier to work. It will bind together sandy soil, making it so that the nutrients actually stick into the areas around those root zones. We also increase water retention in the soil. We increase the microbiology in the soil. We balance the pH levels. When we're adding compost, it naturally balances the pH to adjust to what the plant's needs are. We're recycling nutrients. We're reducing the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And we're actually fighting pathogens and bad bacteria in the soil. So that when we're adding mulch to the soil, it is just, there's so many incredible benefits. And then we also want to protect the soil with a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch. Now, mulch can be any type of wood chip, uh, wood bark, straw, any type of natural material, even grass clippings or newspaper. In this situation, I'm going to be referring to mulch as a wood chip, like arbor mulch or arbor chips, or rice straw. Rice straw I like to use around my vegetable beds because I find it's very easy for the little seedlings to penetrate and to grow through that rice straw with ease. I know it's not always easy to find. You can pick it up at like a farm supply, but if we can't find it, the mulch we can purchase at the local garden center or the landscape supply will work just as well. Okay, but we want to put the mulch around, again, the root zones of our plants and in those garden beds. When there is a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch, and we're putting that actually on top of that compost, if we put the compost down, the mulch goes on top of it. When there's a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch, it's protecting the soil. It allows water to infiltrate with ease. This is really important during our rain events because when we get heavy rains and we don't have that mulch, there's a tendency for not only the water to immediately not absorb or infiltrate into that soil, run off as if it was hitting concrete, but over time it can actually cause erosion. When we have that mulch on top of the soil, the rains will actually absorb into the soil with ease, and it will reduce flooding, believe it or not. We also want to understand that when we have that beautiful 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch on the soil, it's reducing the evaporation rate significantly. So that really benefits us during periods of dry. So when we're not getting rains as often as we'd prefer, or we're in those drier summer months, then that mulch is really doing a lot of work for us. When we use mulch, we're also reducing soil compaction and erosion, as I mentioned. But another thing to keep in mind is it's going to reduce weed seeds from germinating. It's going to feed the soil as it breaks down. It's also going to provide habitat for those beneficial insects, in addition to when we leave the leaves in our garden. We just want to make sure we're not having the mulch around the base of the plant. We don't want to suffocate anything. And then here's a photo from Orchard People that I think is pretty cool. Um, it shows her adding that straw as mulch around the drip line of the fruit tree. I imagine that she probably has a couple inches of compost underneath that, but this just shows how we want to protect some of our trees and shrubs, especially newly planted trees and shrubs through the winter months. We're going to top dress with that compost and then add about 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch, always keeping that compost and mulch away from the crown of the plant. So where the trunk meets the root zone, we'll just leave a few inches, but then we really want to bring it out around that and cover that root zone that's directly under the canopy of that plant. And this will be perfectly protected for the coming months, especially if we get any, frosts, light frosts, hard frosts, and any severe weather. Sheet mulching is also a really cool thing to consider incorporating into the garden. This is going to be ideal for areas of the garden that have been ignored or that are not really ready to plant, or where there might be a lot of weeds, or just an area of the garden that's just kind of been difficult. Um, Maybe the soil is just really crummy, or maybe it's an area where we want to replace that lawn. We want to rethink that. Although if you are going to replace the lawn and you want to take advantage of those rebates, make sure you sign up for the rebates first, because oftentimes that area needs to be looked at first to qualify for the rebates. So we don't want to do any of that work yet. But sheet mulching. Sheet mulching is sometimes also called lasagna mulching. It's the process of revitalizing an area of the garden with that poor soil, creating a new garden bed or planting zone over an area of grass by layering or laying down sheets of organic matter. So different layers of cardboard or newspaper overlapped, and then having layers of compost and or mulch. Typically always topping it, the very top layer is always going to be about 3 or 4 inches of mulch in the form of wood chips. Um, Something magical happens when we sheet mulch. That crummy soil that used to be so lifeless or poor comes to life. And over time, we actually are able to improve the soil conditions so much that we can dig in it with ease, we can plant in it with ease. It just completely changes that whole ecology of the garden. And it's a very simple thing that is going to save us time, money, and fossil fuels. And in a lot of cases, reducing the amount of lawn that we would need to mow. So it's very simple, and it's highly recommended. So think of sheet mulching as building a lasagna, and over time the soil becomes rich and alive and ideal for planting. Cover crops are something else that's really cool, and something that I think is underutilized. It's a wonderful way to keep the soil healthy during times between planting seasons or food crops. As I mentioned before, like you're removing those tomatoes and zucchini squash, you don't want to leave that raised bed bare. We actually want to have it planted. And if we're not going to plant the next season food crop, then instead of leaving it unused, it's a great opportunity to put cover crops in so that they can continue to nurture the soil. They'll continue to protect the soil from damage and erosion. They'll continue to feed the microbiology. They'll replenish nitrogen in the soil, so it's free nitrogen. Their flowers will attract beneficial insects, including pollinators during the winter months, on those warm days when they're out foraging. And then they'll also improve the soil structure and the soil's water holding capacity, which we're always aiming for. We're always aiming at increasing that soil's water holding capacity so that our soil could be more like a sponge, where there's a lot of pore space for air and for water to move through. So it just continues to do a lot of work for us. And they're typically very inexpensive, very cost effective, and yeah, just an easy way to, improve the soil structure. All right, let's have a few words about pest prevention for the fall and winter season. So First thing we want to look at is any trees or vines or shrubs that might be touching our house or within a couple of feet of the house. We want to keep these plants, the trees and shrubs and vines, healthy, but we also want to keep rodents that can easily access our homes and other structures by using these limbs and vines to make easy access into our homes. So we want to prune any tree branches back from structures to any limbs that might, again, have the potential to do damage to the house or do damage to a structure in a storm, or that might be vulnerable. Maybe it's a limb that might seem a little heavy. We always want to consult with a licensed, certified ISA arborist. Please understand that your regular gardener, if you hire one, is not as skilled or educated to, doesn't have the same uh, knowledge for understanding tree health. And trust me, when in my early days of being a gardener, I didn't understand either. And so I think I did some damage to trees, but hire a professional arborist to assess it. But when we can remove these limbs, we're keeping the trees healthier, and we're also preventing rodents from using them to get into our roofs and into our attics and so forth. And then we're going to begin to see more mushrooms. Now, this isn't necessarily something we want to prevent. Mushrooms, in the garden, this is not always a bad thing. They help break down nutrients and to feed your plants. So they're actually really part of the ecology of the garden. Often, mushrooms are often a sign of a healthy garden environment and commonly appear after rains or with frequent irrigation. So they're going to show up in moist soils, and they are just the fruiting bodies of the underground network of mycelium, which is a natural occurring thing in soils, right? They are short-lived and they will disappear quickly on their own. However, we want to be careful handling mushrooms, and proper identification is important when making decisions about removing the mushrooms in the garden. So what I recommend is, if we have excessive mushrooms that we're concerned about, or if we have any mushrooms that we're concerned about, we want to take a couple and put them into a baggie or paper bag the same day that we're going, and maybe take some photos of the area before we've harvested them. And we want to go to our local UC Cooperative Extension, maybe call before to make sure that you have the office hours correct, that they're open. The reason why is because mushrooms start to disintegrate pretty quickly, especially if it's a warm day and they're in the bag. They can kind of just go get mushy. And then we take them there and we can get the mushrooms properly identified, and we can understand what story they're telling. Because some mushrooms are actually can be clues that there could be something else going on with the health of a tree in the nearby area. So that's why it's just nice to get a little curious and just to see if this is something we need to be concerned about. And then storing away and cleaning up any unused pots, saucers, and containers that might be used as hiding places by overwintering insects, slugs, snails, even breeding grounds for mosquitoes. So we want to store and stack saucers upside down to prevent catching that water. We want to clean all of these pots before we stack them, and we just want to have them in a nice place just so that they can also reduce any pests they might attract. We want to protect tender plants from frost as we move into the winter months. It's not unusual for us to get light frost, and then also in some cases heavy frosts, especially depending on where we live throughout the Bay Area. Some areas are more prone to harder frosts, but keep in mind that not all plants are frost tolerant. Many tropical plants like geraniums and citrus and some annuals will need some protection from frost. Many winter edible plants are quite hardy, such as peas and lettuces, onions, cauliflower, cabbage, and so forth. These cool season vegetables generally can withstand temperatures as low as 26 degrees. And then even hardier crops like beets and Brussels sprouts, carrots, and so forth, they can really shake off temperatures as low as 20. So they can handle some of these colder temperatures. Even pansies and sweet alyssum, they don't mind frosty, cold weather. But some of our tender uh, frost sensitive plants are going to need some protection. So a couple of tips: we want to keep the plants well hydrated. If it's a dry winter, just maybe just water some of these plants before the night sets on, to make sure we also have that nice protective layer of mulch, which will really insulate the soil and the root zone of those plants. And if you've got smaller containers that you can physically move, just move them closer to the house or under an overhang, or into a garden shed to protect them from those frosty nights. And also cover them with frost blankets or row cover. If the wind is a problem, you're going to want to anchor the fabric with maybe bricks or something weighted, stones or anything heavy, so that the fabric doesn't blow away. We want to really use these specific row covers or frost blankets as opposed to plastic or paper. We really want to use the products that are designed, because these products actually allow UV light to go through, and they allow actually the plants to breathe. And then after the danger of frost is over, we just want to remove these coverings so the plants don't overheat. But keep them handy, because there's often more than one frost per season. And then there's these really cool products called anti-transpirants. These are just kind of like almost like a waxy coating that can spray onto the leaves of the plants, spray onto the evergreens, that protect against moisture loss. So they're very important during a heat event, but they're also really important during a frost. So we apply to frost tender evergreen trees and shrubs, frost tender fruit trees like citrus, and protect them from those seasonal frosts. It's a little bit like us wearing like a lip balm on our lips or putting sunscreen on, but this will actually be a little bit of an extra protection against frost for some of those tenders. And then once the rains come, we notice that so will the weeds. So we want to keep the weeds in check. We want to hand pull anything that's just emerged, or use those weeding tools such as the hula hoe and so forth, just to keep those weeds from maturing or growing very quickly. We also want to take advantage of the mowers and the line trimmers to keep them as low as possible, as small and as short as possible. And above all, we just want to make sure we've managed these weeds before they go to seed. The goal is to really prevent them from going to flower, so that we can kind of maintain their populations. Okay, and what I'd like to share now is that fall is for planting. Here in California, the fall season is our best time of the year to add new plants to the garden. So why is that? It's because we've got shorter daylight hours, cooler evening temperatures. We can take advantage of the rainy winter season. We are about 8 or so months until the heat of the summer is at its peak. And we're about 10 months or so until we're at the driest summer season. So we've got a lot of time for our plants to grow healthy root zones and become established before those stresses of the summer. I love this illustration. Do you see the comparison of the two trees on the bottom of the page? So it's fall planted versus spring planted. See how developed the root zones are on the fall planted trees? This is what we want. This is why planting in the fall is so advantageous. It really is going to grow a more resilient plant that's going to be able to withstand the hot, dry summer months when they come. And the goal is to always grow a healthy root zone. Okay. So that's really why we do so much work to prepare the soil and to grow and nurture healthy soil. So this might be a little bit, this information might be something you already know. So please bear with me. But when we buy a plant from the nursery, it is not uncommon for the root zone to be the exact same shape as the pot when we slide that pot off. So we see the picture on the right, and then we see the picture in the middle. And then what we really want to achieve is when we're planting it, we want over time that plant to look like the illustration on the right. So when we pull the plant out of the root zone, we take these plant tags that give us so much great information. And we're actually going to score the sides and the bottom just to start to loosen up those roots a little bit. And then we want to dig a hole the same depth as the root ball. We don't want to go any deeper. We're going to amend with that compost, add a little bit of organic fertilizer, and then backfill. We always want that crown ever so slightly above the grade so that we can lay that nice 2-3 inch layer of mulch around the outer edge to protect that root zone without burying the crown. Okay. Next, we're going to then water that plant in really well. We're going to focus the water on that root zone at the outer reaches of where that plant roots are. So in the pot, the plant roots might only be the size of that pot. So that's where we're going to focus the water until those roots start to grow. So newly planted plants are going to require more water than you might think the very first time after planting. So we really want to saturate the soil, especially if the soil has been dry and it hasn't been watered, or we haven't had any rains. We really want to really make sure that water wicks through all the pores, and is very well evenly, moist to saturated upon planting. But then from there, we really want to start to back off from the watering, and we're not going to apply that water until the soil has dried out a bit. Okay, so what we're looking at is, I'm so sorry. So what we're looking at is watering deeply, and we're going to start to bring the water out as the root zone grows. How can we tell if the root zone's growing? Well, the upper part of the plant is going to grow. So we're going to use the upper part of the plant as our guide. So as the upper part of the plant grows, that's where we're going to target our water, okay, right at that outer edge. And we are going to water deeply, and we're going to let that soil dry out in between watering. And we are going to taper back the frequency as the plant becomes established. Always watering deeply though. All right. And now we can talk about the plant selection for garden health. We're always going to choose climate appropriate plants. Here in California, we live in a Mediterranean climate, which is a climate that receives winter precipitation and is dry throughout the summer months. And from what I recently learned is that we live in the driest of all the Mediterranean zones on this earth. So we are in the driest one. And I think sometimes it really feels that way, right? So we're going to choose California native plants and Mediterranean native plants that are going to adapt to our summer dry climate. We want to follow the 80-20 guidelines. So we want to favor 80% California natives, and we can mix in about 20% Mediterranean natives. That's really the goal, or 100% California natives. But really, we want to have something flowering throughout the year, even in the winter months. So we're going to really take note of our unique microclimate of our garden space. We're going to note the sun exposure, the shade, the wind, the grade of the soil, all of it. And we're going to match the plants to the conditions of our garden's very unique microclimate. We always want to plant the right plant in the right place, okay? This is really important to do our homework. We want to match the plant to the conditions of the garden to keep it from being stressed, or stressed plants, as we've learned, are more prone and susceptible to pest problems. So we want to match the mature size of the plant to the space that's available, because we always want to avoid overcrowding. We want to avoid regular trimming. We really want plants to only get pruned during their ideal time. Not everything likes to get hedged all the time, like privets or boxwoods. And then we want to always group plants together into zones that will share the same needs once they're established. So it means they're going to share the same water needs, that maybe the same feeding needs, and so forth. And then for those of us that like to grow food, cool season crops are planted now when the days are still warm and the nights are cool. So this is a great time to sow seeds for peas and lettuce, radishes, kale, chard, and so many more. It's a perfect time to plant your alliums, such as the garlic, onions, and shallots, or the brassicas, such as the cabbage, the broccolis, the bok choys, leafy greens like chard, kale, lettuces, and arugula, and many herbs that we don't consider to be cool season, such as cilantro, parsley, and dill, thrive when we get the seeds out this time of the year. And then, of course, this is a great time of the year to plant spring bulbs, such as your irises, some lilies, tulips, and then many are deer resistant, such as the allium, the crocus, daffodils, grape hyacinths, and snowdrops. I will share some of these bulbs are also gopher resistant, but from recent experience, I plant everything in gopher baskets because those gophers don't always read the memo. Just like the deer, they don't always read the memo. Okay, so now let's talk about watering during the fall and winter months, because this is something that, we all were trained just to turn off the irrigation systems come fall. But and as we move into the cooler temperatures, with the it's still warmer days, cooler evening temperature, shorter daylight hours, we will want to adjust the irrigation frequency to water less often. And we might even need to turn off the controller when the rains start. But we really want to be mindful if we're having a dry winter or if there's a dry period between rains. We want to pay attention, and we may need to turn the irrigation systems back on, or at least hand water, just to make sure everything is getting hydrated in an adequate way. Keeping in mind here, our plants are accustomed to winter precipitation and a dry summer. So we want to make sure we're kind of mimicking that if we're not getting the rains. So irrigation systems, for those of you that have one, we want to adjust the controllers for the fall or winter season. Of course, we want to take advantage of that smart controller rebate if we don't have one already. So if we have an old-fashioned system, we're going to have to adjust the controller, or let's take advantage of that rebate. We're always changing the irrigation for the seasons, so more time between watering, but not less water. So again, we still want to water if we haven't had rains. We still want to water deeply, but we don't want to water again until that soil has dried out. And this time of year, we're really seeing that it could take a week or so, even 2 weeks before the soil dries out. Then the best time to set our controllers or to water is always the sunrise hours. So anywhere between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. And this is actually going to be ideal because the soils are still cool, the air temperatures are still cool, and pest problems are less likely to develop when we can water during those hours. Just like new plants, we want to make sure we're watering at that drip line or the root zone. So this is that illustration that kind of speaks to that. I know this is a tree, but this is going to apply to just about any of the plants in your garden. And then the mulch zone is also going to be above that root zone and beyond. So as you see where the blue triangles are, that's where we're going to focus the water. That's where we're going to focus the fertilizer. If we're feeding, we're going to focus that compost, and we're also focusing the mulch. We're not bringing it up around the trunk of this tree. We also want to check our irrigation regularly. This time of year, it's not unusual for us to notice some breaks in the irrigation because many of the urban critters were trying to access water during those hot days that we experienced just a few weeks ago. So the hot days of summer, the critters hear that irrigation going on in the middle of the night. And then they're going to gnaw on that irrigation. It's also easy for us to, nick an irrigation or break something when we're, digging in the soil or mowing and so forth. So that's why we want to check for these leaks to prevent any unexpected surprises in our next water bill and to avoid wasting any water. We also want to prevent runoff um, from our properties. So by increasing the health of the soil, by adding that compost and such, we're actually able to have that water infiltrate with more ease. However, there are times when the water is still streaming off our properties. So we prevent it by increasing that soil health so we can get more saturation rate. We also can create berms. We can take advantage of mulch. We can install rain gardens. We can get swales. We can do a lot of things to try to prevent the flow of watering moving off of our properties, keeping in mind that holding on to as much water as possible not only benefits our garden and can saturate the soil deeper down, recharging the soil, the groundwater, the deeper lying aquifers, but and also getting down to deeper rooted plant material like trees and shrubs, but it's also going to prevent overloading the storm drains. And that's what we really want to get to because that's where we start to see flooding. However, if we happen to see some flooding or pooling on our own property during the rain season, take note of this so we can correct it during the dry season. When the soil the area that has dried out, we want to consider installing a French drain or garden swale or rain garden. There's a great rebate for rain gardens. We want to redirect that water to prevent pooling, especially around the plants, because this could really reduce the lifespan of this tree and other plants. They don't usually want to be sitting in water or having their feet wet for too long of a period of time. And then just a brief little note about rain gardens. This is an excellent solution and very easy to do is to install a residential rain garden. It's sometimes referred to as a rain basin or a swale, but it's an area to redirect water that might be overflow from the roof or the downspout or a rain barrel that we can direct to an area of the property that it's a very shallow basin where that water could spread out, it could slow down, and it actually can soak into the soil. Really great, really easy, very inexpensive way that is a wonderful solution to hold back that water and allow it to soak in to our precious ground that our garden would really appreciate. So then after all of that work, guess what? We get to enjoy the season. So I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening. I'd love to finish with any questions that you might have. And then, you know what, if any questions happen to come up later because we're just not thinking of it yet, please don't hesitate to reach out to me anytime. You can find me on my website, which is plantharmony.org, or you can email me. You can find that information on my website. You can also find it here on the screen. And then you can also find me on Instagram at Plant Harmony. So thank you so much.
Now we do have a very few questions.
Oh, great.
One is, will the slides be shared afterward?
This program is being recorded and it will be posted on the Bosqua's YouTube channel, I believe. And so that's where you can access the material.
We also have a question. Can you please clarify which types of plants should not be covered by fallen leaves?
Most plants would suffocate because they need to photosynthesize. So I would say it's really nice. I mean, part of maintenance is actually removing leaf debris from plants that get buried. So I find it to be very therapeutic and relaxing job. It also gets me really up close and personal with the plant so I can see if there's any issues, if their crown was buried with soil, or if the irrigation got too close, I can then move it back out. But I can't, off the top of my head, I can't really think of anything that can withstand a thick layer of leaves that then might get wet and heavy.
Right, and our last question for now, you mentioned planting a variety of plants so that there's always something that's flowering. Why is that important?
Oh gosh, thank you for asking that question. It's really important for our pollinators. We have here in California several native pollinators. We also have our honeybees, the European honeybee that's very active. And in the winter, as you all have experienced, if you've lived in the Bay Area long enough, it is not unusual for us to get an easy 65, 75, or 85-degree day in December or January. And so those pollinators are going to come out foraging. And if they don't have anything to forage in the form of pollen or nectar, then it could actually be quite detrimental to them. That's their food. So I'm a big advocate for having something in flower year round. It also is pretty. Right now, the California native goldenrod, asters, the native and non-native asters, those two are really going gangbusters. I still have zinnias left over from the summer that are still going gangbusters. Many of them kind of have withered and done what they needed to do, but I've got a couple that are still going strong. Um, and that's I've got some pelargoniums that the hummingbirds are hitting every day. It's so fun. They get pretty close to where I'm sitting on the front deck. It's just nice to have something always in bloom for the wildlife that surrounds us. Those our garden friends, our garden allies that really require that food in the form of pollen and nectar.
Let's have a wildlife show year round. We have another
Yeah.
question. When do you recommend pruning apricot and plum trees? Any recommendations for trench gardening with buried waste?
So for apricots, you want to prune them. Um, they are usually very early harvest. So it's usually July or August. After you've harvested all the fruit off the apricot is when you want to prune them. For the plum tree, you can uh, they're starting to lose their leaves now. So as soon as leaves have dropped, you can prune it. However, as I mentioned, I usually just wait until January. I usually have a lot more time in January. So it's kind of like a fun task. I just go out and do all my pruning over a few days. And then I'm sorry, what was the other part? The trenching?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Um, the second part was any recommendations for trench gardening with buried garden waste?
Um, well, off the top of my head, no, because I'm not exactly sure. I would need more details, I guess, to answer that question. But I do know that there are some really great books available at the library, specifically on that topic. I would look at like Gaia's Gardening or some type of sustainable gardening or biodynamic gardening type of book. Well, they would get into a technique like that. Also, there's some good information online, although when I am always a little hesitant to recommend online searches because I would limit it to maybe Rodale's gardening. I don't know what they call themselves, but they have a lot of information. And Rodale book of gardening and landscape techniques and composting has kind of been a tried and true for decades. I'd also limit it to university searches, making sure you're getting something that is just really more sound and not something that's maybe a little bit more made up from someone that isn't a professional. But you usually can read a few articles and kind of weed out what is the common theme or message for those techniques.
Sure, thank you. We have another question. Do I need to chop dried iris leaves before using them as mulch?
I guess that depends on, I usually just do a technique called chop and drop. I don't even go into the details of like doing small chopping, but if you like that look, that is kind of, it's a personal preference. They will decompose more quickly. That could be a good thing or not. So I think it's up to you. I mean, I guess leaving them long, it would be, they could be a place of harboring slugs and snails if they're stacked up too much. So, again, pros and cons to every situation and really identifying what would be best for you in your garden. Oh, and
Oh,
Victoria,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
sorry,
no,
sorry
it's
about
okay.
that.
It just took me a minute. I was like, oh wait, you're muted.
I said it twice, and then I realized that I muted myself, sorry. How do you prevent or get rid of moles and voles?
Um, so moles, I find moles to be very beneficial because they're eating the insects in the soil. And oftentimes the insects, especially in the form of grubs, which are the larvae of beetles that can be problematic to my plants, I see it as a pest, they're eating those. So they're actually doing me a favor. They're reducing a pest problem. However, they can be quite destructive, and I understand, especially if it's a turf area, that they can, kind of make these mounds, and it's not attractive. So, the way to get rid of them is to remove the food source. So, if you have grubs in the lawn, and that's specifically the area you're talking about, is you'll want to apply beneficial nematodes to the soil. Um, they're naturally occurring soil dwelling organisms that feed off of soil dwelling larvae, which is what the moles are going for. So if we remove the food source, then we can remove the moles. Ultimately, if it is the turf area, the reason why the grubs are there is because the lawn isn't exactly getting the care it would like, because we are here in California and we would treat lawn care a little differently than we would in the other, 49 states of the United States. Um, then, but there's also some very effective repellents you can use that have to saturate the top like 6 inches of the soil. They're castor oil based. So I would recommend reading the label, making sure you're getting something that has castor oil in it, and then applying it specifically as the label says. It is a very specific, the application is so specific for success. So please read the label and apply it accordingly. Oftentimes you have to apply it several times over a period of like 2 weeks to get enough saturation so that it will repel effectively. However, keep in mind repellents are just temporary deterrents, so we're not solving the problem. For voles are like field mice. We want to keep our areas mowed. We want to reduce any piles. We want to in ideally remove any ground covers they could be hiding in, but they use tall grass and ground covers kind of as their freeways. They make these little zones they can run through. They know their prey, so they stay usually hidden, so that they can not be a snack for a owl or a hawk. And then if they're chewing on something, typically we just get some wire or some tree wrap to protect what might be chewing. I would say that you could definitely get more information on both animals from or on the UC IPM website. I also have a blog that talks more about the moles on my website, so you could check that out too. But UCIPM will go into more detail for the voles and maybe some information beyond what I've talked about for moles.
And the last question is, what is the tip about digging a hole to bury materials to fortify the garden? This was in the class promo, and I think the question asker is referring to hole composting.
Well, when we add materials to the hole that are not composted, we are we're adding raw materials that will over time get decomposed by the microbiology in the soil. So we're feeding the soil. Of course, we're planting things at a certain height away from that raw material so that the root zones don't get burned during that decomposition. But using compost, I mean, it's just another technique. So I just usually used finished compost because I find it to be easier and in some ways more readily available, especially in larger volumes at the rate that I'm planting. Um, I also don't want to, I have a tendency not to put raw materials that are food out in the garden because I don't want to encourage anything accessing it like rodents, raccoons, anything, possum, anything that might be interested in digging it up. Um, so I'm always a little bit hesitant to use a food product out in the garden.
We did have another question pop up. How long should you wait before planting areas where you've used sheet mulching techniques?
Oh, well, you can actually plant on the same day that you've sheet mulched. It's just sometimes a little bit more labor intensive. So you can plant, there's a couple ways you can go about it. You can plant everything really high because you want to compensate for the grade that you're going to be, the height of the grade that you're going to be adding, because you're adding like a good 5 inches of material in some cases. So you want to make sure everything's kind of planted high. Or you're going to put down the cardboard, you're going to cut holes in the cardboard, you're going to plant. And again, it's going to be a little high to compensate for the 3 inches or so of mulch and compost or just mulch. But if you want to just use the sheet mulch in an area to condition the soil and get to it later, it can be 6 months, it could be a year, it could be 18 months, whenever that cardboard has really started to decompose. You can plant and you'll notice that soil is very rich and really easy to dig. If we're sheet mulching areas and we really are using that to suppress weeds, we just want to make sure we're replenishing and always maintaining that 3 inches of mulch in those areas.
And our last comment is to thank you for such a wonderful class.
Thank you so much.
I don't see any other questions coming in, so I think that's wrapping up for this evening. Do you have any closing comments, Susan?
I don't. I just want to thank everyone for joining. I really appreciate your time and attention. And I just encourage everyone to, yeah, get out in their gardens and just find that space that's relaxing and brings the joy and that brings so much support to our everyday.
Thank you for that, especially poignant. Have a wonderful evening and thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.